thank you to Peru Sostenible 2020 for this wonderful invitation. It's a great honor for me to share some thoughts with you and to exchange some ideas so that together we can help to move forward at a very important and very difficult time in the world. This pandemic of COVID-19 that is raging in Peru and raging in the United States and affecting the entire world is a tragedy, and it is a wake-up call also. It's a dramatic message to all of us to take more seriously the need for sustainable development and to change from our politics that is a game for power to a politics to solve our problems. The title of this session is Las nuevas métricas para el país que queremos. And I think I would say even beyond that, it is nuevas objetivas para el futuro que queremos. It is really to set our goals, the goals that we want for Peru, for los Estados Unidos, for todo el mundo. And we need a better set of goals than the ones we've had. The goals that you just try to make as much money as possible is not working. It doesn't even make our economies work, but it doesn't solve crucial problems like injustice or the arrival of so many diseases in recent years. COVID-19 is not the only one. We had Zika virus. We've had more dengue fever. We've had SARS, MERS, because we're not taking care of nature and we are disrupting nature, and that is leading to more diseases. 5 years ago, seems like an eternity ago, but 5 years ago, all of the governments of the world at the United Nations agreed to los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, the Sustainable Development Goals. And they also agreed to the Paris Climate Agreement for climate safety, to stop the dangerous activities that are leading to climate change and causing so much disruption in the world. Our governments agreed to these goals, but then politics took over. In my country, we've had the worst government in our history with Donald Trump. I'm hoping we have a new president soon. We really need a new president, so wish us luck in the United States. But we need governments that work to solve the problems of our people. Now, COVID-19 has been devastating, and Peru is one of the hardest hit countries in the world with 33,000 deaths. It's one of the highest death rates in the world, around 1,000 people for every million people in Peru. The United States has been very hard hit as well. And I know in the US case, it's because Donald Trump doesn't do his job. And we need public action for the well-being of the public. What's true is that in both Peru and in the United States and in Brazil and in other hard-hit countries, the inequalities are so large that poor people were especially vulnerable to the pandemic. They couldn't protect themselves, and the government did not give clear policies in the United States, for example. So the poorer people, the African American people, the Hispanic population has gotten hit with deaths and disease much higher than the richer white population in the United States. And inequality has played a massive role. This is why when the governments agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals, they put the reduction of inequality at the center of the goals that everybody should benefit from all the technology that we have, from all the know-how, all the science, that this should be at the service of every child in Peru, not only the well-to-do, or every child in the United States, not only the well-to-do. And the government's also put at the center of los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible environmental protection, because we have 4 major environmental crises simultaneously in the world. We have the new diseases, which are coming from disrupting the habitat of animals, like COVID-19. We have the climate change, which comes from burning coal, oil, and natural gas. We have the destruction of the habitat of other species, especially for our farms and our cities, like the burning of the Amazon rainforest, which is so devastating and widespread that the whole rainforest is in jeopardy now. And we have massive pollution from all of the chemical products that we're using, especially plastics, and all of the air pollution that especially poor people breathe, because poor people live near industrial facilities or in congested places near highways, and so they don't get the clean air. So the idea of sustainable development is what we call inclusive and sustainable economic strategy. That is, everybody is part of the solutions, inclusive and sustainable, in that we stop these 4 very destabilizing environmental threats by taking actions for clean economy, clean energy, reduced pollutants, and better care to avoid the new diseases such as COVID-19. How can these goals be achieved? It's not easy. The first thing to say is that we have to stop the pandemic itself. And because Peru and the United States is so much being hit by this pandemic, we need public health measures, especially, of course, as you know, people wearing face masks, keeping a distance from other people. We need the government tracing people who have become sick to their close contacts to protect people, because people are infecting their family members. They are infected, then they don't know, then they infect their children, their parents, their siblings. And we need contact tracing so that government is able to say to somebody, you're sick, you've tested, we will help you to stay safe and quarantined for the next week or 2 with the food and support you need so that you don't infect other people. And these are urgent measures that will save a lot of lives and that our countries desperately need. In my country, Donald Trump doesn't believe in these measures. That's why I consider him the worst president we ever had in our history. He makes fun of the scientists. He doesn't wear a face mask because he thinks that that's not macho. And the result is that we have 220,000 people dead in the United States. So we need leaders that are responsible, that are decent human beings. We're working on that in the US, believe me. We've got 2 more weeks to go, and I don't know what we're going to do if Trump wins again, but there's a good chance he's going to be defeated, and that will help Peru, and that will help the whole world if that is the case. But once we defeat this pandemic, which is possible, and government should spend everything on protective equipment, on face masks, on all the help that's needed to defeat this terrible scourge, then we need to take actions, government, universities, and business together to achieve sustainable development. Now, how can these better goals, these nuevas métricas y los nuevos objetivos, actually be achieved? There are, in my opinion, 6 major transformations needed, and I'll summarize them and then I'll conclude because we're going to have some discussion as well. But in my view, the 6 transformations are the following. First, we need every child to get a good education. This is so important because we live in a knowledge economy, because no country can thrive unless our children are well trained. And training and education starts with a healthy upbringing with adequate nutrition and a safe and loving environment, and then entering preschool and at least completing upper secondary education, if not going on to university. And in Peru, there still are a lot of children that don't complete upper secondary education. The numbers of education have improved a lot, but there still is more to be done. And then to improve the quality of the education, especially in the sciences and mathematics and so on. The second major area is a health system that works for all people. And again, we see from this pandemic that public health did not work in Peru properly. It did not work in the United States. We have many people in the United States that don't have health coverage because my country is rich, but it is very unfair to poor people. It's very bigoted against African Americans, many of the white people. And so we don't have a fair system. We need health coverage for all people. The third transformation is we need to move to a clean energy and industrial system. Now, this is hard because Peru and the United States and many other countries earn money from fossil fuels, such as petroleum. But we need to make the transition to wind and solar power and hydroelectric power. Now, Peru has vast renewable energy resources. You have some important desert, which is some of the best sunshine in the entire world. There's a lot of hydroelectric power potential. There's wind power potential. These need to be developed because no country will be able to thrive on fossil fuel in the future. It won't even be purchased by other countries in the future. And so the move to clean energy is a third necessity. The fourth is sustainable land use. And here, Peru has such magnificent nature, and it's such a diverse and beautiful country. But a lot of it is under threat in the Pacific, in the coastal areas, in the Sierra, and in the Selva. In the Amazon, we have tremendous damage because of pollution, because of deforestation, because of forest fires, and this needs to be brought under control in a sustainable manner. The fifth area is sustainable cities, because our cities are crowded, they're polluted, they have a lot of slums, and we need to use the new technologies for cleaner transport, clean air, green energy, in other words, zero carbon energy for all, electric vehicles. This is the change that will come to our cities. And the sixth transformation is the digital economy, because we have great technology now with digital smart machines, smart grid, the Internet of Things, connectivity everywhere so we can have telemedicine, We can have schools online when we need to. We can have free online education. We can have e-banking. We could have e-governance so that people can get their public services conveniently and transparently online. We can have real-time data to protect the natural environment with many kinds of digital information, and so forth. So these are 6 major transformations that should be at the center of our government's thinking. In the United States, our government's been so short-sighted, actually so nasty, that government is just used to try to steal money from somebody else rather than to build the future. We need government that undertakes the long-term strategies, knowing that during any single government, it won't complete the transformation, but it will be part of a long journey. The idea, after all, is for us together to build the future that we want. And I appeal especially to Peru's young people and young generation. This is a time that's needed for change, and it's needed for action, and we need global cooperation to achieve these changes as well. It's good news that the world has agreed to these goals. We have great moral leaders like Papa Francesco, whose messages to the world, Laudato Si, and his new encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, tell us the story about how, in an ethical, moral world, we can move forward together. And that is really what our purpose is: inclusive and sustainable development that helps everybody in the world to have the future that we seek. Thank you very much. I really appreciate Peru Sostenible's leadership, and I'm so happy to be with you today.
Thank you very much for your presentation, for your words, Professor Sachs. Let me ask you a question. You wrote an article late last year regarding or about why rich cities rebel, and you mentioned Paris, Hong Kong, and Santiago, Chile. Santiago and Chile is a reference for Latin America regarding a model to follow, a country that has really do great things, and it was really the model. But we had that riot in November last year, and we had that in 2019. 1 year from then, we have suffered this pandemic. How do you think the pandemic is going to change that already unstable cities, which probably will touch every city in the world?
When Santiago had the violence a year ago, I think everybody was shocked. Santiago, you know, this is the capital of the country that everybody said was the best governed in Latin America. And indeed, Chile has had very good government in many ways. And so it was a big surprise for people. It came after a small increase of the tolls for the public subway system. And people rejected that, and then there was actually burning of the metro stations and tremendous unrest. But what we did know about Chile could have told us about the vulnerability, because what we did know was the inequality being so high in Chile. We use as a measure of inequality the so-called Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient is a numerical measurement of how unequal the income distribution is in a country. And it's a measure that goes between 0 and 1. 0 means everybody has exactly the same, and 1 means if you could think about it, that one person has everything and everybody else has nothing. So complete inequality. And Peru and Chile and the United States all have Gini coefficients near 0.5. 0.5 is one of the highest inequality levels in the world if you compare across countries. And what it means is that in the Americas, because of the history of our continent, the history of our side of the world, because it was a history of conquest and a history of multiracial societies with very different power, we ended up with big inequalities of income. And when the inequalities are so high, society is destabilized. In the US, for example, the US was a slave-holding society and actually had a civil war to end the slavery. But even after the Civil War, the white population continued to suppress the African American population and keep it poor and keep it segregated and keep it living in divided conditions in a very brutal way. So even though slavery was over, injustice was absolutely continuing for another 150 years. In fact, Donald Trump is a white supremacist. He keeps the inequality going till today. So we've had protests in the United States across our cities because of police brutality, because of inequality, and we're seeing the same kind of instability. The way to overcome instability is through justice. The way to overcome instability is through inclusive policies. And what we've learned in this pandemic, very sad to say, is that the more unequal the societies, the harder it has been to control the pandemic. It's not absolutely clear why, but I think the higher the inequality, the less our governments represent everybody, and the less they're trusted, and the more social unrest there is. And of course, rich people are able to protect themselves better than poor people. But if you look at a world map, which I do every day, many times a day, because of my work on trying to help stop COVID-19, the Americas, from the United States through Mexico, through Central America, through South America, is the hardest hit part of the world. But it's the most unequal part of the world also. And I think that that's just not a coincidence. It's a message to us. We need fairer societies.
Great, thank you for that. We've been kind of, and you mentioned on inequality, kind of obsessed in the last 50, 100 years on the GDP growth and GDP per capita. And when we rank countries of those that were doing good, GDP growth was the main metric. In Peru, we've had 20 years almost of great GDP growth that in a way came or generated a big reduction of poverty under the metrics we are using. But this pandemic, what makes clear is something that you have said is even though we have good GDP, under the pandemic, we've realized that education needs to improve a lot, and also infrastructure in education. People or kids that are suffering the most are those that do not have an internet connection in the rural areas. And that 1 year lost will increase inequality in the future. We have a very weak health system. So in order to go into the future from the SDG metrics, which ones do you think should start to replace the big GDP per capita or GDP growth?
First to say, GDP growth is still desirable, but it's not enough because it does reduce poverty, or it can, and it can play a role in improving lives. But there are two big problems with just looking at GDP growth. The first is the unequal income, because it could be that the economy grows, but all of the benefits go to the rich and not to the poor. And this has been literally the US experience, that all of the gains, or almost all of the gains of recent years, have gone to the richest people. And now it's crazy. I can't even think how crazy it is. We have 4 Americans, 4 people, Jeffrey Bezos, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk, that together have $530 billion of wealth. 4 people. It's hard to even imagine a world like that, because so much of the gains have gone to the tech sector, and so many people are suffering at the same time. So the GDP doesn't measure that. And it also treats as income if you chop down a tree, or if you burn another barrel of polluting oil. That's counted as GDP, even though it's harming the environment. So it doesn't take into account the environmental costs. So we need metrics that measure the inclusiveness of growth as well as the environmental consequences. And that's why I lead a team that produces each year an SDG index, which looks at indicators not just of GDP, but across all 17 Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, and measures much more the fairness and the sustainability of the economic productivity. But I would look at the following. First, I would ask, are children in school and getting a quality education? And are there still children that are not? Because this is so vital. Then I would ask, what is people's access to basic public health and medical care when they need it? That's a second indicator. Third, I would look at the inequality of income. That's what I mentioned, the Gini coefficient. And then fourth, I would look at the environmental metrics to say, is our country solving the environmental crises, or is it adding to the environmental crises? And even this smaller number of indicators could really help to give a more complete picture of the reality. But I would really look at Peru's children and ask, how many are being left behind right now? How many don't have access? How many don't have proper nutrition? How many can't go to school? How many can't stay in school all the way to complete at least upper secondary? How many are not learning properly because the teachers aren't qualified or are underfunded, and so on? Because what happens to the children is the single most important indicator of what is happening to the future of the country.
You mentioned these 4 Americans that have $530 billion. Some people support them in the way that these are new fortunes, people that has generated their companies from scratch and actually have generated a lot of wealth in another metric. So how can we go to the middle point in a way that we can still reach or really push innovation, push these new entrepreneurs that really generate wealth, and in a way also redistribute without without destroying capitalism, which today is kind of a bad word. Capitalism is a bad word, but at the end, capitalism has generated this huge IT innovation that today is key for the next 30, 50 years. So how can we get this balance?
In American history, we had a capitalist at the end of the 19th century named Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie was the owner of the steel monopoly and railroads and many other things. He was an incredible businessman. He was a visionary. He was a monopolist. He did many things. But one thing he did was very interesting. He said, I'm very good at making money, but I believe my money is for all of humanity. It's not just for me. He wrote a book that said, if a rich man dies rich, that is a disgrace, because our job as rich people is to give away our wealth on behalf of humanity. He actually called it the gospel of wealth. So the idea was that the Christian gospel says, okay, you can use your God-given talents to build new industry and enterprise, but you must serve humanity in doing it. Now, Mr. Bezos today has $200 billion of wealth. There is no way that any human being could conceivably in any way use that for himself, his family, his neighborhood, his city. It's an incredible amount of money. So he needs to take responsibility for saying, okay, he added a great enterprise, Amazon, but now how is he going to give back to humanity? And this is a very important question. Of course, one answer is pay taxes. Don't lobby for low taxes. Pay taxes and contribute to the social well-being through the government being able to afford public services. Another way could be creating enterprise for the public good that does the same thing. Mr. Carnegie gave libraries all over America. And so wherever you go, there's a Carnegie Library, or he created the Carnegie Endowment for Peace to help promote global peace and understanding. And so there are ways to be creative to give away your money for the public good, not only to make your money for the public good. And I think that this is a very important part of it.
Yes, indeed. And so now, I mean, it's kind of easier for giant companies, from these companies to impact the SDGs. But going to more middle-sized companies or big companies, how do you see the role of the private sector in the implementation of the SDGs? This is not only a public role, it's not only a public responsibility, it's entrepreneurs and also citizens. So how do you see the private sector role and the citizens' role on the implementation of the SDGs going forward?
I think the important point for a business is first to realize that the SDGs give a vision of the future. So if the SDGs are pointing in the direction of renewable energy, that is an indication for a business that maybe being in the solar power business is a good business for the future. If the SDGs indicate sustainable land use, that is a good indication for the kind of farming practices that should be followed. So the first thing the SDGs do is help businesses to orient themselves about what the future direction of the economy is and what the future direction of technology is. But then I always suggest to businesses that they ask 4 questions for themselves. The first question is, are my products, the goods and the services that I provide, good for people, good for sustainable development? Because if I'm producing a product that is polluting or dangerous for health or addictive, I should not be in that business. So first question is the products. The second question is the production process. When I produce my products, am I creating pollution? Am I destroying more selva? Am I harming the local community where I produce? So is my production process sustainable? The third question is my value chain. If I buy from suppliers, if I buy from smallholder farmers, if I sell to a company, are my suppliers and my customers responsible companies? Or am I engaged in a business that doesn't behave itself upstream and downstream? And then the fourth question is, am I a good corporate citizen or a good business citizen? Do I follow the law? Do I address my counterparties honestly? or am I trying to trick them? Am I responsible to my workforce for not discriminating, and so on? So I believe these 4 questions about your products, your process, your supply chain, and your citizenship are needed to help companies answer the question, am I doing the right thing? Because companies today, just like governments look at GDP, companies look at their profit. And they say, well, if I'm profitable, I must be good business. But it's like GDP. You could be profitable for the wrong reasons, and for reasons that eventually, sooner or later, are going to be very destructive. So ask whether your profits are really coming in the right way, which is good products, sustainable processes, sustainable supply chains, and good citizenship.
Great. I have here a question from
I'm
the
going
audience.
to have to finish shortly, I'm afraid.
Okay, this is the last question, and this goes this way. The sustainable development goals are measured by country, but today the fundamental problem is global. How are we connecting the local measures with the global problem?
Great question. If you read our annual report called SDG Index and Dashboards, one of the things we try to do is look at the so-called spillovers between countries. In other words, what is one country doing that is hurting another country or causing damage? It may be that it produces polluting products, and the pollution shows up somewhere else in the world. It could be, like the United States, is a supporter of tax havens, so that Peruvian government can't collect taxes properly because the money is sitting in Bermuda or the Cayman Islands instead of in the government account. And so we score the US as being creating harm to other countries. Or it could be that a country is selling military equipment that is more destructive than beneficial. So these spillovers are extremely important, and big, powerful countries can create a lot of harm in other countries, and they need to be called out and brought under control for doing so. I'm very unhappy, by the way, for example, about American US sanctions on Venezuela, because well, without saying about the Venezuelan government, I don't think the US should be starving the people of Venezuela by preventing that country from operating its basic economy. And so these are spillover effects that are really an important part of our world. Now, instead of harming others, we need to be cooperating, and we need to be especially to the powerful countries, to tell them, we don't want more wars, we don't want more regime change, we don't want more Cold Wars, we want cooperation. So I hope the next president, well, I hope it's Vice President Biden in 2 weeks, we need to rejoin the World Health Organization. The United States under Trump pulled out of WHO, out of the World Health Organization, in the pandemic. The United States needs to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. The United States needs to cooperate with China, not try to make a Cold War with China. Because if we're fighting each other, we're hardly going to be building the future that we want. The cooperation is really important. And within South America, it's a very big place, and the governments are very diverse. But we need regional cooperation, for example, to build a renewable power grid that covers the Andean region, the Cono Sur, and connects with Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. In other words, all of South America, clean energy system. That requires cooperation among the countries of the region. And I think not only there, but in other environmental matters. Think of the Amazon. The Amazon is not one country, it's 9 countries. And Peru needs to work together with Colombia, with Brazil, with the other countries of the Amazon to stop the destruction of this unique resource for humanity. So cooperation is extremely important.
Professor Sachs, thank you very much. I think you ended with a great world cooperation, not only between governments, but also within a country, between the public sector, private sector, and citizens in general. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Great to have this conversation.
Great to see you. So good to be with you. Thank you.